Hello guys and welcome to a new video. So we are going to solve another equation involving both the integer part and the fractional part. And as usual, as a reminder, so the integer part of x is the greatest integer less than or equal to x, or we can write it in this way: the max of all integers less than or equal to x. Or we can write it in this way: the integer part of x is equal to p integer, if and only if x belongs to that interval. And once again, we have equality on this side and no equality on that side. And this is because if we had equality here, then p plus 1 would be the greatest integer. And finally here, for any real number, x can always be written as the sum of an integer part and a fractional part, where the fractional part always positive and lies in this interval. So for example, if x is 1.75, then the integer part would be 1 and the fractional part would be 0.75. And if x is equal to 2, where 2 is an integer, then it is equal to its integer part and the fractional part is always 0. Okay, so let's get down to the solution now. So the first thing to notice about this equation is that the left-hand side is the difference of two integers, and hence it is an integer. So the left-hand side is an integer. This means that the right-hand side is also an integer. So we know now that the right-hand side is an integer, and since the fractional part here does always belong to that interval, then 2 times this fractional part belongs to the interval, to the semi-open interval 0, 2. But we know that 2 times the fractional part of x is an integer, being the right-hand side of the equation. Then this means that either 2 times the fractional part of x is 0, or it is equal to 1, which is the other integer in this interval. That is, we either have integer part of x is 0 or integer part of x is a half. Now, last thing to mention here before we start solving is that since the right hand side is always positive, so because the fractional part of a number is always positive, then 2 times the fractional part is positive, then the left hand side has to be positive as well. Because if not, that is, if the integer part of x is negative, then this left hand side is negative and we don't have an equation. So the integer part of x is greater than or equal to 0, which means that x is greater than or equal to 0. Now, what does this say? Well, this tells us that if a solution exists, then it has to be a positive solution. Okay. So we know that the integer part of x is either 0 or a half, and we are going to study those two cases. So if the fractional part of x is 0, then x is an integer, and the equation transforms to this equation: 3x minus x squared is 0, which leads to that x times 3 minus x is equal to 0, and this equation has two solutions, either x 0 or x equal to 3. And if the fractional part of x is a half, then x is equal to the integer part plus the fractional part, which is a half, and by squaring we get x squared is equal to this one squared plus 2 times this one and that one, which is the integer part of x, plus a half squared, which is 1/4. And now I have to take the integer part of x square, that is, I have to take the integer part of the right hand side. And now since this term and this term, they are integers, then I can move them out the square brackets. So the integer part of x squared is equal to the integer part of x squared plus the integer part of x plus the integer part of 1/4, which is 0. So the integer part of x squared is equal to the integer part of x squared plus the integer part of x. Okay, now I substitute this one by the right hand side in the equation, and the equation becomes like this. Rewriting, we get this. Rewriting, we get this. And this gives us that the integer part of x is 1. So now the solution in this case is the integer part of x plus the fractional part of x. So the integer part of x, we just found it is 1, and the fractional part of x, it is a half. So 1 plus a half is 3/2. So in other words, we have found all the solutions now, and the set of solutions to this equation is the following set, which consists of 0, 3/2, and 3. Well, thanks for watching, and see you on the next video.